reviewing the algorithms underpinning many of these platforms and similar products. Can you please connect the dots for the committee, the link between the scale that these companies manage to achieve and the algorithms that they use to feed content to targeted users?
Thank you for your question. I'm going to make a confession. I haven't audited these algorithms because these companies have not welcomed me or invited me to inside their systems. They would not want me there. And for that matter, I don't think I would take that job for the very reason you're asking the question. As an algorithmic auditor, I want to consider who would be harmed, who are the stakeholders, and what kind of harm would come to those stakeholders or might come to those stakeholders. I don't go in assuming there's harm, but I do go in thinking about who are the stakeholders and what could harm them, and then making and developing tests and experiments to see the extent to which these harms are actually occurring. So for example, the kind of research we learned about from the whistleblower around teenage girls and suicidal ideation would be the stakeholder, teenage girls, and the harm would be suicidal ideation caused by their experiences on Instagram. That would be an example of the kind of stakeholder and harm that I would examine. But if I were to actually be given the job of auditing the Facebook algorithm or the Instagram algorithm or any of the other algorithms, it would just be too large. There would be too many stakeholders. For example, it's very clear to me that if I had been given that job 4 years ago, I never would have imagined the stakeholder that would be the Rohingya Muslims who are going to be, there were going to be a genocide against them in Myanmar. That simply would not have occurred to me. So it's just too big a job to do that, and it's because of scale, because it's international, and because even within the United States, it's too large to imagine who are the stakeholders and what kind of harm could befall them. Having said all that, there are specific stakeholders that you can imagine right now that are interested, that are the focus of this particular committee, that you could be saying, well, wait a second, are these stakeholders having these harms that are actually illegal or a national security threat? And that is a kind of algorithmic audit I would be happy to do. It would not be something that Facebook would invite me to do. You would have to somehow subpoena the data for me on my behalf, but that is something I could do. So just to summarize, auditing for me is a stakeholder and a harm and an experiment to see the extent to which that harm is falling on that stakeholder. And I'd be happy to do that, but you have to choose a few of them because there's just almost an infinite number to consider a priori.
Okay, Ms. O'Neill, thank you. Dr. Frank, having observed this hearing, paying close attention to the broader discourse in politics, culture, society on these issues, what do you think is being missed by policymakers, and how is the nature of our debate perhaps overlooking key considerations or facts relevant to the policy discussion?
Thank you. I think a lot of what is being missed is, or I should say the focus is sometimes on purposes, intentions, listening to the companies say we're working on this, we wish we had caught that. I really think it is long past time that we look beyond what the companies are saying they care about and what they're intending to do and simply look at what is happening, that the question of intentions just be something we leave in the past. And so this is why I suggest, for instance, that Section 230 is ripe for reform, because it gives too much deference to the idea that this industry will be able to regulate itself. I think the other important issue is to recognize that certain types of changes to Section 230 need not raise or settle all of the First Amendment concerns that have been brought up that are, of course, legitimate to bring up and be concerned about, that modest reforms to Section 230, for instance, denying immunity when it comes to harm that is caused, that is foreseeable, and to which intermediaries have exhibited deliberate indifference, all that would do would be to allow people to be able to sue these companies if they had a theory. It doesn't mean that they would be vindicated. It doesn't mean that some of that speech would not ultimately be found to be First Amendment protected. It means that the industry would not continue to have this kind of preferential treatment that rarely any other industry really has. They would be called to account. They would have to reveal documentation. They would give us some transparency about the inner workings of what these companies actually do. And they would allow, at least in some cases, for people who have been harmed to prevail and to actually get some kind of compensation for their injuries.
Thank you, Dr. Frankson. What information about the business practices of these firms that may not currently be public do you think would be of the greatest value to Congress as we weigh potential statutory revisions?
There are any number of things that I would particularly be interested in hearing what these companies are doing, but just to take a few examples, when companies implement policies against certain types of harms and say that they now have removal policies, let's say with non-consensual intimate imagery, what is the data in terms of what kinds of reports they're getting? What is the data in terms of whether they are taking those requests seriously? How quickly are they responding to those requests? How often are they aware that those types of material is flourishing on the platform and increasing engagement? How many times are they willing to nonetheless hold to their principles and take it down as they have said that they would? In essence, are they actually fulfilling the promises that they're making to the public?
Thank you, Dr. Frank. Thanks to the panel. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.